Hello, everyone. We would like to ask everyone to take your seats. We have to start promptly as there's another event scheduled after this one. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I would like to welcome you all to the Adaptation Fund side event titled Adaptation Fund Engages the Next Generation. The objective of the side event is to discuss youth's participation in climate adaptation projects and programs supported by the fund, their roles as actors and beneficiaries of these interventions, and the barriers they face. The event will include a presentation of findings from a study produced by the Adaptation Fund titled Youth Engagement in Climate Change Adaptation, followed by a discussion on concrete examples by our implementing entity representatives on ways youth were involved in adaptation interventions and the roles they assumed. We are happy to have with us today the Adaptation Fund Board Chair, as well as the COP27 Presidency Youth Envoy, and representatives from various Adaptation Fund projects from different corners of the world that have strong youth components, and they will provide some of these examples to us. We will also hear from a representative from CSOs and their perspective on the role of youth in adaptation. And then finally, we will have representatives from the Scout Movement and Youngo, which is the youth arm of the UNFCCC, which are both strong advocates of sustainability and climate action. I would kindly like to ask you to keep your questions until the end for during the Q&A session. And with that, we have a tight agenda, so I'd like to introduce to you the first speaker. We will have Mr. Albara Taufik, which is Adaptation Fund Board Chair, who will give some opening remarks. Albara, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Hello? Shall I move there?
Hello.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. Greetings to you, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to address you at this important Adaptation Fund event dedicated to youth engagement and climate change adaptation, titled Apologies for the technical glitches. I hope it will be better now. I'd like to welcome you to this Adaptation Fund side event titled Adaptation Fund Engages the Next Generation. The Adaptation Fund has supported projects that have largely benefited youth since it became operational in 2010. This support occurs both directly and indirectly as youth make up a significant portion of the population in our project locations. From early on, the fund has encouraged integrating youth into developing and implementing adaptation projects. Through different funding mechanisms, it pioneered an institutional design that includes measures that promote the involvement of local level actors, including youth, in planning and implementing adaptation solutions. In delivering on its mandate to finance concrete adaptation projects and programs that benefit the most vulnerable to climate change, the fund has prioritized actions that meaningfully involve and deliver benefits to local actors, including youth. Many fund projects have a significant component that integrates youth into climate adaptation solutions, from raising knowledge of adaptation to direct involvement and implementation of projects, including planting mangroves to address sea rise and climate-smart agriculture. Furthermore, the Adaptation Fund's innovative facility has recently pioneered the Adaptation Fund Climate Innovation Accelerator, that targets a broader range of potential finance recipients, including local governments, non-governmental organizations, community groups, young innovators, and other vulnerable groups. So this funding mechanism opens a door for youth groups and young entrepreneurs to access climate adaptation finance directly for innovative projects and apply their own innovative ideas to adaptation. The Adaptation Fund has also taken its pioneering direct access modality a step further to develop the enhanced direct access modality, where control over project approvals process is developed to a national institution, thus enabling local actors to define and implement appropriate activities via small grants. Furthermore, the fund has policies and strategies in place that guide the development and design of projects to enable youth engagement and empower them as key stakeholder in finding solutions and adapting to climate change adaptation challenges. The Adaptation Fund's environmental and social policy ensures that projects shall provide fair and equitable access to benefits in an inclusive manner and avoid disproportionate adverse impact on vulnerable groups, including children, women, and girls. It also required that stakeholders and project beneficiaries are involved as early as possible in planning. Meanwhile, the Adaptation Fund gender policy requires projects to consider the vulnerabilities of young women, address gender gaps, and promote empowerment of women and girls. The Adaptation Fund's core impact indicator have promoted consideration of youth in adaptation projects by its implementing and on-the-ground partners creating incentives to conceptualize, design, and implement projects that benefit youth and involve them as stakeholders in project design. The Adaptation Fund Secretariat has also actively consulted with youth representatives about their experience and expectation with climate change adaptation. It recently invited youth to share their views about the next medium-term strategy and gathered their feedback. We were also honored a few years back when Greta Thunberg decided to donate a portion of her Freedom Prize earnings to the fund. Lastly, the fund released a new case study on youth engagement and adaptation projects just a couple of months ago that further highlights the value and importance of youth involvement and leadership in fund projects. Overall, youth participation in the Adaptation Fund projects improves adaptation interventions, efficiency, acceptability, and appropriateness. Their participation in development projects activities brings on out-of-the-box ideas. They feel comfortable with experimenting with new methods that enhance the sustainability of adaptation action to the local context, in which, in return, improves the sustainability of projects. The activities are context-specific, and youth are empowered to continue working on adaptation and safeguard advances. The fund wholeheartedly embraces this and continues to offer new opportunities for youth engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Albara. We will now move on to a guest from Egypt. She's the COP27 Presidency Youth Envoy, Omnia Lomrani, and she will give us some welcoming remarks and hopefully some experiences from Egypt. Thank you.
So hello everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I remember the first time I worked and learned about the incredible work that Adaptation Fund was doing, especially for youth, was during the Youth Dialogue in Rotterdam. That was 1 month ago. And I remember very clearly how it was demonstrated the inclusion of youth across all the processes of the policy design, implementation, as well as funding for grassroots youth-led initiatives. And it's important to say that they had a good combination, a powerful one, of utilizing the science, building the capacity of youth, utilizing behavioral change as well as the finance to really empower youth to lead our own independent adaptation solutions. So I'd like to first start my remarks by why is it important for us as young leaders and experts to be part of the global adaptation efforts as well as the local actions. As youth, we are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. When we specifically look at a very drastic example of Pakistan and the floods, we know now that over 400 youth were killed, 18,000 schools destroyed, thousands of healthcare facilities that are not resilient and that are not well adapted to such impacts have been devastated with an exacerbating disease burden. And this brings in the urgency of placing adaptation at the forefront with loss and damage. But at the same time, the young people that are impacted around the world, where over 50 million has been displaced, 500 million now living in areas with high risks of extreme weather events, 190 specifically of extreme drought. All of such impacts are affecting youth, who are our children, who are the ones that we value most. And at the same time, we recognize that time is not on our side. Delaying action further is going to make it more harder, expensive, and the cost will be paid by the lives of children and youth. And that is why, as young leaders and climate advocates, we see the urgency in accelerating the adaptation prioritization of this agenda and leading our own independent adaptation solutions. And I say this because I know many young people in Egypt, in MENA, as well as globally, who have demonstrated such an innovative capacity and led their own solutions as young social entrepreneurs, agri-farmers. And one example of that is a young entrepreneur who is from Kenya, and she has created one of the very first drought-resistant seedlings to withstand the changing and the water scarcity. And then I know in Egypt, a really close friend of mine who started her own social enterprise as well. And what she did is that she created plastic or polyester films over the soil to help the soil adapt to the humidity and maintain its capability. And then I know that there are many young people as well beyond Egypt and Africa and the Philippines and Madagascar who were building their own and rebuilding actually cyclone-proof schools to also protect the children and enable them to adapt to the accelerating rates of extreme weather events that their countries witnesses more frequently every year. And these examples really emphasize how we, as the youth demographic, as the 1.6 billion around the world, we have such an untapped potential, but as well as persistence when it comes to addressing climate change, especially adaptation, because it affects us the most, and we have the least to contribute to the emissions driving that. We have developed our own small-scale affordable solutions for adaptation. We recognize that they have enormous potential to reshape and to reinvigorate adaptation and climate resilience policies. But again, we cannot do it on our own. We need our governments, we need our partners, our supporters, our technical agencies to guide us and to help us elevate and amplify our work. And I remember that just yesterday we had the first ever youth-led climate forum during the Youth and Future Generation Day. It was the very first time. It was based on what has been adopted in the Glasgow Climate Pact in Article 64. And we had a roundtable between young representatives and practitioners and negotiators, chairs, and ministers discussing adaptation, loss and damage, and resilience, demonstrating our policy asks, co-creating together how we can integrate our asks within the negotiations taking place at COP27, but also to help influence our country positions. One of the key takeaways from that specific session was how young people were specifically trying to find ways to access climate finance and specifically adaptation as well as mitigation finance. How can they be eligible to apply for funding, being that many young leaders and innovators have their own small entities or small groups. So there needs to be a way to ensure that they are able to access the support that is needed. And then one thing we also talked about is how to build the capacity of youth to both be able to mainstream and integrate their policy asks within the discussions that are taking place in regards to the adaptation negotiations. So finally, as a young climate activist and as a representative of the COP27 presidency, I recognize that and I myself see the urgency of galvanizing the political will that is needed specifically for adaptation, and to see the same attention that we see for mitigation to be at least equal when it comes for adaptation and loss and damage, and to be able to work together with the policymakers, with the youth experts, and the different organizations, and to overcome both the political and the financial barriers to driving adaptation, as well as defining the global goal on adaptation, this COP. We, as the COP presidency, will not spare any effort to place adaptation at the forefront this year, with COP being in Africa, the first in 6 years. And I think it's also an opportunity for me to invite you to work together with us. I myself am here to listen, support, and see how, as we say that this is the implementation COP, and adaptation is necessary for being part of this implementation agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Omnia. Indeed, youth cannot do it alone, and that's where the Adaptation Fund role comes in. And to that, we will now listen to the findings and lessons learned from the Adaptation Fund study on youth engagement in climate change adaptation. And this will be presented by our colleague, Ms. Alisa Gomez, who's a climate change specialist at the Secretariat. Alisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Omna, for that very inspiring remarks. And I think that's a good segue into sharing some of the findings from the Adaptation Fund study that was conducted. The study came out of the learning and sharing pillar of the fund, and it examines some of the common challenges and barriers to youth engagement, but also some of the lessons and opportunities that came out of the youth engagement in our projects. So just to mention that the fund analyzed about 125 projects from its portfolio, and these were qualitative assessments, but also surveys and semi-structured interviews as well. And there are a few key findings that have come out of this study. First being the fact that out of the 125 projects, about 50 of the projects looked at youth as key beneficiaries. About 27 of the projects looked at how to engage with youth not only as beneficiaries, but also involve them in consultations. And 51 projects had targeted efforts towards capacity building, knowledge management strategies, and as well as try to engage youth in the implementation. So going off that, let me share some key roles that came out from the portfolio. And one being youth as builders. So this was a project in Seychelles implemented by UNDP, and I won't go into too much of detail because we have Srilata here who can talk about the UNDP projects. But this project, the project management unit actively sought youth to implement the planned activities, and these included ecosystem-based restoration works, and youth were involved in diverse organizations, and these were the Seychelles Youth Council, it was the local Adventist church, for example. And what they found is that the project accomplished its goals much faster with the involvement of youth in the implementation. Youth as knowledge brokers in our project in the Dominican Republic, implemented by our national implementing entity, IDDI, and the vital aspect of this project was in disseminating knowledge about climate change and its impacts on the communities where the interventions were taking place. So a communication strategy was designed, and in the process, the youth took a very prominent role as eco-promoters. So in this case, they not only acquired knowledge about gender and climate change, but they also informed and created awareness in the communities about gender responsive interventions and climate impacts. So in this way, they became knowledge brokers. Similarly, in our project, I believe this was in Chile. So in this project in Chile, youth emerged as community guardians. And this is something really interesting about this project, because when the AF project started its implementation in 2017 or 2018, youth from communities had been migrating to the cities in search of better economic opportunities, etc. But then two things happened. There was an unforeseen social challenge and social unrest in Chile. And secondly, the global pandemic hit. So emerging out of this, the youth had to stay in their homes and communities. And unexpectedly, they started to engage with the Adaptation Fund project where they were residing. And in this way, they got trained by the project, and they saw an opportunity to collaborate with the agroclimatic risk management system. And they came up with very creative ways to disseminate climate risk information. So they regularly measured weather conditions in different microclimates with the partnership with the local executing partner. And the team then distributed information to the local communities. So in this way, they emerged as community guardians in the Chile project. Our project in Armenia is taking another approach. This is an innovation small grant where the project is developing gamified solutions to try and create awareness about climate change. So the project is currently aims to target about 100 schools in different regions of the country. And it's expected to stimulate the youth to apply climate change knowledge. But what's very interesting here is they're actually engaging the youth to develop these gamified solutions. In the Cook Islands, this is a project implemented by UNDP. In this project, the youth took a very active role in implementation. And again, I'll let Srilata talk about this project in detail. But I want to highlight another important role played by youth as innovators. So the innovative approaches developed by youth in these projects have been extremely influential because youth have shown from our portfolio to be open-minded. They are more open to trial and error. So if things don't work well, they find solutions. And they find new ways of communicating the diverse and wicked challenges that climate change causes in communities. So moving on, at the fund level, the Secretariat engages in ensuring good environmental and social compliance during the project formulation. We also ensure an intersectionality approach in reviewing proposals, so ensuring that youth are active participants in the consultations, but also during implementation. Some findings in terms of factors of engagement. It's important to acknowledge youth's unique experiences when it comes to climate change, and as well as the way they perceive vulnerability. Then climate change awareness and concerns among the youth and how they internalize climate change is an important factor in implementation, and it's always interesting to see when implementing entities take the youth's understanding of climate change in their interventions. Some drivers for engagement is that the projects have always offered trainings. Then there are tangible results that are collected at the project level with the involvement of youth. And the Adaptation Fund has a results framework where we try to collect specific indicators and results from our projects during implementation, and also learning about how these projects involve youth in the implementation. Some barriers to youth engagement are youth migration, as mentioned in the case study in Chile, but also it's the way projects engage youth. Very often when trainings are conducted, they are at the time when youth have to be in school or be in university, for example. So it's important to keep in mind the time-sensitive barriers for youth's engagement. And it's important to also look at the way youth can be involved most strategically in decision-making roles in the projects. So it's not simply about training youth about climate change and how their impacts are, but how they can play a key role in the strategic element. Some benefits of youth participation, some of these have been mentioned. They bring out-of-the-box ideas and innovative ways of addressing challenges. And there are many benefits on the individual level, but also at the community level. It enhances personal development at the individual level, enhances their skills for engagement, and as well as future economic opportunities. But at the community level, it helps enable a mindset shift in the local communities just because of the way youth are able to engage with communities. Some challenges, it's important to mention, and the way to address these challenges especially, since I covered the challenges already. We need to think about meaningful participation about youth. And what we mean by meaningful participation is exactly this, is that it's important for projects to consider perhaps quotas in community-based organizations or committees at the local level, and thereby cementing youth's engagement at the local level, but also strengthening partnerships within organizations, whether it's at the national implementing entity level, for example, or at the execution partner level, where youth can be involved in scholarships or internships where they can get practical know-how. So coaching programs and establishment of networks to involve youth, so really making this activity concrete in terms of establishing the networks and ensuring their sustainability post-implementation. And finally, to encourage social innovation and entrepreneurship in projects. We've already seen these coming out, but this approach can be targeted during implementation. And with that, I end my presentation.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for sharing with us the experiences and the lessons from the study. Now we will have the opportunity to listen to our implementers from the ground. We will start with our direct access implementers. The first one is our entity from Morocco, Ms. Hajar Chimanti Houari, who's the Investment Promotion Officer in the Aggregation and Partnerships Unit of the Agency for Agricultural Development in Adam, Morocco. Hajar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. So thank you, Christina. As I said, my presentation will address the Adaptation Fund funded project in Morocco, the PACZO project, which stands for the Climate Changes Adaptation Project in OISIS zones. So the objective of the project is to help reduce the vulnerability of people and OISIS agroecosystems in Morocco to climate change by increasing the adaptive capacities of local actors, increasing the resilience of the target ecosystems, and disseminating knowledge management. The project combines four main components, which are improving adaptive capacities of the water sector, diversifying income sources, and improving the living conditions of the populations that are vulnerable to climate change in the targeted areas, improving the ecosystem's resilience in response to climate change and variability, improving stakeholder awareness through the management and exchange of knowledge, and finally, strengthening the capacities of participants in the design and implementation of adaptation measures. So here are some key figures of the project. The national implementing entity in Morocco is the Agency for Agricultural Development. The national executing entity is the National Agency for the Development of Oasis and Argan Tree Zones. The region targeted is the region of Dar'ata Filalt, which is a very vulnerable region in Morocco that suffers a lot from water scarcity and drought. The project aims to benefit more than 40,000 beneficiaries with a total cost of 9.97 million USD, which is approximately 95 million Moroccan dirhams. So moving on to the approach for targeting the youth within the project, we have 4 main activities, mainly the socio-economic projects in partnership with youth associations and co-ops, the support of youths in the field of entrepreneurships. We'll take the example of the Startup Oasis program, improving the living conditions of youth in schools, and supporting the youth sports activities in rural areas. So we have many diversified projects that we're contributing to income improvements within the project, with a total beneficiaries of 3,341 youth and more than 16,000 women. Here is, for example, the first example is the poultry breeding project in partnership with El Ghaba Co-op in the province of Zagora. The second example, for example, is the equipment of a bakery for young women in the region, for namely the co-op of Afous Made in the province of Tinghir. Moving on to the second activity for supporting the youths in the field of entrepreneurships, we have signed an agreement with the Institutes of Agronomy and Veterinary Research, Hassan II, for the design of a business incubation model adapted to the Oasis contents to the benefits of the young entrepreneurs of the region. So far, the achievements were 13 operational projects who received the support and guidance and many training sessions within the program, and 12 startup projects that are identified and funded and implemented as well within the projects. The third activity actually is improving the living conditions of the youth in schools. We have made many activities within it, like such as the rehabilitation and development of environmental and ecological spaces. For example, the Najah Sargo School, the Mohammed V High School in the province of Tinghir, and finally the Abdurrahman Dakhil High School in the province of Rashidiyah. We have also made rehabilitation and construction of many actually sanitary blocks in the benefits of Dar Talib and Dar Taliba, which stands in Arabic like the house of students, both male and females, in the province of Zagora. And moving on to the final activity that targets the youth within the program is supporting all the youth sports activities in the rural areas. We have acquired the transport vehicles for the benefit of the Ithran Qob Sport Association in the province of Zagora, but still it's a multifunctional vehicle that actually serves the youth of the region whenever there is the need of it, just like it can be a school transport, and it's actually a very multifunctional vehicle that serves all the youth of the province. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hajar.
Thank you.
We will move on to our next NIE. This time it's from Peru. Ms. Claudia Godfrey Ruiz, who is the Director of Development and Supervision of Projects from Profonape, Peru, will share insights from the project titled Adaptation, Climate Change Adaptation to the Impacts of Climate Change on Peru's Coastal Marine Ecosystems. Claudia, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Sorry. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. I am Claudia from Profonampe, Peru. We are the Environmental Fund of Peru, and I am very happy to share with you our experience working with youth in the last 3 years. In the past session, I heard something very, very nice that I'm going to share at the end. So just to make a brief presentation about the project. Our project is, in the our short name, because it's very long, is the Coast Marine Adaptation Project. This project supports the Peruvian government to reduce vulnerability of the coastal communities against the impacts of climate change in the coast marine ecosystems and their fisheries. We work in 2 pilot projects. One is in the mid-coast of Peru, one is in the northern part of Peru. And we work with 2 executing entities, the Ministry of Production and the Marine Research Institute of Peru. So our theory of change is if we improve resilience in the communities and strengthen the monitoring systems in Peru, we will have the capacities to manage, for example, early warning systems with good governance, and finally develop good policies with climate adaptation evidence. And with this, I want to present you 3 experiences that we have with youth. The first is Aprobio. Aprobio is the production and commercialization of biofertilizers from residues of the artisanal fishing and, of Huacho and Máncora. And what is this? We work with waste. And this was an idea of young women. This is really exciting for us because we learn from them about this opportunity. This was an idea that was incubated, but has a lot of importance because agriculture is working with them and the demand is really high. And with this, the women of other associations, of men associations, the wives, are understanding that this is a potential business, and we are going to replicate this model in most of our beneficiaries in other projects. So this wasn't the main idea, but it's really, really nice for us to have this as a potential bio-business handled by young women. The next is Reactivares. This is a business that works with natural fibers that are transformed into handicrafts with the sustainable management of restoration of ecosystems. This is natural fibers that grow in the coasts, and this is an alternative of business when, for example, it's not possible to go for the fishing because of the problem, because, for example, El Niño or La Niña, or, I don't know, some kind of phenomenon. So this Reactivares is offers an online traditional use that they used to have, like having this artisanal, how you say this? Artisanal way to produce some kind of products. So the incomes, part of the incomes go for these people to improve their livelihoods, and the other part is the capital that they are going to have to produce in the next years and have this sustainability. At the very beginning, this business was like, no, this is not going to have some kind of impact, but it has. For young women also, this is really important because they are very handy, exactly, very handy. And they are selling, you can see maybe that red circle, red, is a patriot symbol of Peru, and they are selling this in abroad all the coast and in very important markets. And the final one is Madre Perlas. This is jewelry, and also in this case 8 women are working among 20 members in this creation of unique handmade high quality jewelry. So this is a higher investment. They are not just working with us, they are being supported by other organizations, but they are producing these high quality products that are going to continue doing even after the project ends. So I just want to say that working with youth ensures innovation, ensures thinking out of the box, and also power. In the previous session, here one guy says youth, and everybody answers power. So youth, power. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It was great to hear about some of your examples in biofertilizers and the production of artisanal baskets and jewelry. We would love to have some of those. We will now move on to the next panelist, who is Srilata Kamila, who is the head of the climate change unit of the UNDP, who will share some reflections about the role of youth in general, as well as some other examples from projects that were under their implementation. Thank you. Srilata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is wonderful. I have to say, one of the more refreshing events that I've attended, just because it puts a smile on our faces to see so many inspiring people, young people, are one of the welcoming remarks that was provided. So it's really heartwarming. It helps us actually, I think, as we forget sometimes in all the chaos, the work we are doing, where the action is and where the empowerment and benefits lie. So it's thank you for having me in this event. Slightly different approach, just because we couldn't quite favor one project or the other one. Just wanted to, just reflections across a few here. But I just wanted to start by sort of saying that I think at UNDP, it's sort of both a demographic but also a democratic imperative to engage youth. And we focus a lot on climate action and development action that leaves no one behind. And youth is a big part of that. Again, both for demographic reasons, depending on the countries, but also really for the inclusivity and leaving no one behind. And we've heard before, there's disproportionate impacts on many vulnerable groups, and youth is one of them. And in some ways, they bear the brunt of this for a long part of their life and a large part of their lives, and grown up with much of the impacts that we see of climate change. So UNDP works quite a bit with youth in terms of not only promoting and advancing their engagement as beneficiaries, but as change agents, and in development, in peacemaking, in climate action. And that's important, again, going back to some of the findings that were discussed in terms of youth engagement, not just as a means, but an end and a valid end in itself, and how do you look at youth empowerment from that perspective. What's heartening to see is UNDP has, in the last couple of years, we've had this largest offer in the world around supporting countries in updating their national pledges, so the National Determined Contributions, or NDCs as they're called. And in our support, we're happy to see that 80% of the countries have updated their NDCs compared to the previous update on 40%, to really include youth engagement and empowerment as part of climate action. So that's really heartening to see at a level, at a global level, and a corporate, sort of a forum where youth are seen as a big part of the solution, not just as beneficiaries, but a big part of solution. And thanks to Alyssa in terms of highlighting some of the key findings in the report. We can, again, youth as part of innovation, as part of the effectiveness and the efficacy of these interventions. And that's critical, because it's like, as was mentioned earlier, it's throughout the process, in the co-design and consultations and implementation, in representation during implementation and how this is enhanced. So I just want to touch on a few of the projects that were mentioned. You mentioned Seychelles. This was a project around, water conservation and beach erosion where youth were engaged. Youth outreach was done through schools. And it was an interesting project because, the education as part of the curricula, youth were engaged in training them and understanding climate risks and how youth can be engaged in as part of the implementation of the activities. And it's a lot of dynamism and empowerment that's infused in these projects when we engage youth, and I think that's wonderful. And you mentioned some of the outreach groups that were part of the project. I also wanted to mention the Cook Islands project, which was a whole-of-island approach in the 11 outer islands of Cook Islands to really work with communities and public services in understanding climate risks and informing the activities in terms of decision making and implementation. How do you address with this kind of evolving uncertainties of climate change? And they were focused again on ecosystem restoration, water conservation, as well as an early warning. And few things I want to highlight here is, again, engaging youth in sort of representation on the boards of these projects and some of the responsible parties in implementing the water conservation activities. It's also about engaging youth sort of in the training and, for example, in reforestation in some cases, or water conservation, but also training on early warning, installation of equipment, operation and maintenance. The project also looked at small grants and how do you bring them together along with training and youth leadership opportunities. How can we actually provide access to small grants for it? I also want to mention Cuba, a project that had really an innovative take on ecosystem-based adaptation and approaches, engaging youth, again, going back to this out-of-box and innovation. How do we look at driving of local culture through engagement of youth? So it was very interesting. The youth, when they were engaged, there was a lot of discussion, again, through education, identifying youth leaders through schools, and looking at educational drives, training activities, activities on ecosystem approaches, and local culture. The engagement of youth meant that in this project there were mangrove fairs. There were music videos on how do you socialize communities on the benefits of ecosystems. There were shorts and promotion materials done for the project. Again, looking at how do you engage communities. So it's not only youth engaged and their dynamism and out-of-box thinking, but it sticks, the messages stick, they are part of the communities, and it goes back to effective resilience building of these communities. So I just wanted to say that, across these projects, a lot of lessons around innovation and training, but it's important to say that we have to think about youth, again, as beneficiaries, but also leaders, but we have to think about what incentivizes them. Leadership opportunities, technical training, small grants. And I just realized I didn't even press. I thought somebody else was going through the presentation. I'm just ad-libbing here, but maybe I should be pressing something here to arrow. Yeah, well, yeah, this was talking about the meaningful engagement. I'm happy, hopefully the presentation can be shared. But again, these were some of the things I was talking about, just sort of from my mind. It's on the presentation here as well. One last thing I wanted to talk about is actually with support from Adaptation Fund. UNDP created this sort of what I call a four-pronged approach, largely for enterprise development. And with Adaptation Fund, with funding from European Commission, we've created this model where there's sourcing done, really engaging local, in our cases UNDP local networks, but also NGOs, direct access entities, a prong on grant and financing to really spur local innovation. That can be adaptation technology, it's a business model, etc. And an arm that looks at technical assistance, but also mentoring and linkages with investment communities, for instance. And an arm that really looks at exit strategy, advocacy, peer networking. And we're really proud to say we've been supporting, last year we announced around 12 grantees across the world. And some of them are youth entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs that we really link to our work we do at UNDP. An example is Smart Farms Fiji, a young entrepreneur and an entrepreneurship community that's looking at hydroponics and how do you scale that and create opportunities for new innovations. So there's also the social entrepreneurship work, again, thanks to Adaptation Fund and other donors, looking at direct access in a way that devolves financing to where it can be locally implemented, and youth have been a big part of that. So we're just very happy to be part of Adaptation Fund work, part of local communities and across the projects, and I do, as a call for action, say that we cannot do this with you. I think it's an intergenerational responsibility. Yes, a lot of problems that you've inherited, but cannot be solved without knowledge that's co-created and innovations that are spurred. So we look forward to continuing to working with the youth across the world. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Srilata. Once again, we heard about the role of youth as agents of change or as peacemakers, but also youth as part of solutions. And again, we also heard about that involving youth ensures their empowerment. This being said, now we will move on to listen to the voices of the civil society. And I do invite on the stage representatives from Save the Children, Yango, as well as the Scout movement and a CSO from Benin. If you could come on the stage, please. Thank you. We will now start with a representative from Save the Children International, Ms. Inger Ashing, who's the CEO of Save the Children International, who will speak to us about the importance of youth engagement in climate change adaptation and from the experience of the Save the Children. Thank you, Inger. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's working. So first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to be here to share a few words from Save the Children and share some of the work that we are doing. And I must say that I'm delighted to be part of a event and a panel where we are equally passionate for youth participation and engagement, and I also are really happy to see some young people sharing this panel space with me. So as we all know, and as we've heard in the panel earlier today, the climate crisis is a child rights crisis. No other group in the population is more affected or worse affected than children. And as the child rights organization, that of course means that addressing climate change and the implications of children is core to us and our mandate. Save the Children is an old and big organization. We are active in almost 120 countries around the world. We are mainly focusing on children's rights to health, education, and protection, and we do all of that with a climate lens and also, of course, an inequality lens. And we know that through this research that we and others have been doing, that 774 million children, a third of all children in the world, face the dual threats of poverty and high climate risk. So that's 774 million children. So we are talking about a huge group. And if you look at the child population overall, it is a huge group of them that see the impact of climate in their everyday life and where it will have enormous implications for their futures. So this is really critical. For me personally, I'm also very dedicated to the topic of youth participation and child participation, starting as a child activist myself at the age of 12. I know that children and their voices matter. I know that as a child you can change the world. And I know that we, as adults, have a responsibility to make that happen. Listening to the great examples here before me, and I must say it's really inspiring to hear about some of the great work that we see around the world from the people speaking before me. Often when we speak about youth participation and child and youth participation, we tend to focus on older children or actually young adults. And I think it's critical to have them participate. But it's equally critical to ensure that younger people, children themselves, are giving a space to be part of the solutions. And just, I think it was very interesting to see the outcomes of the research you've done and the outcomes of the work, and just to say a few words on the meaningful participation. And I agree with everything that you said, Alicia. But just to add two things, that if you engage with younger children, you need to make sure that you engage in a way that they actually understand, that you adapt your language and your communication to their needs, and some of the other panelists said that too. And there's also a really important thing that we often forget, and that is our accountability to them. So we often ask for their input, but we don't give them anything back. And for it to be a respectful partnership, and I think we need to ensure that we have respectful partnerships with children, as with everyone else. We need to ensure that we have that accountability back. We have recently consulted with over 54,000 children across the world in more than 40 countries, asking them about what they think is critical when it comes to climate change and inequality. And as you can imagine, they all say that this is critical for them and that they really, really urge the rest of the world to step up and do more. 5 things that they've said that they want us to do is look beyond national interests. We often tend to focus only on what is in front of us and not necessarily thinking about the implications. I was listening to a group of children yesterday where they were talking about the implications of what is happening there were some representatives from Brazil, and they were talking about the Amazons. And of course, what is happening in Brazil has implications for other countries. So look beyond national interests. Working partnerships, and they mean partnerships with them as well. Respectful, equal partnerships. Draw inspiration from human innovation. And I'm so delighted that so many people up here have spoken about innovation and how critical that is. And we see a lot of innovation in the youth groups themselves. Take responsibility is the 4th thing. And that might be something that you think, of course we do, that's why we're here. But they really, really urge us to take that serious, that responsibility, and be here for the long run, and not just doing this as project by project, but actually take responsibility for a more long-term change. And the final thing is act with urgency. This cannot wait. We need to change the world now, and we can change it. That's what they are saying. I want to end by just saying something about how we need to engage children and youth. And again, children needs to be involved as well. It was great to hear other people talking about them as not only beneficiaries, but also as leaders. But we really need to ensure that we involve them in the whole project cycle if we are working with projects. I mean, it's not just inviting them when we have a problem where we want them to help us solve it, but they know better than we often what the problem is. So we really need to involve them in the whole work because they have a lot of knowledge that we don't. They are experts in their own right. They know better than we do what they need. So we need to listen to them. We need to work with them in a respectful way. And we need to make sure that they are part of not just the solution, but also the identification of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. It was great to hear about the issue of accountability. It is true we need to be accountable to them, as what we are doing now, our actions taken now will impact them in the future. We will now move on to our next representative, Ms. Nathalie Mangondo, who's from YOUNGO, from the Finance and Markets Working Group. YOUNGO is a private arm of the UN FCCC. Natalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me here today. So YOUNGO is the Child and Youth constituency of the UNFCCC, and I specifically am active in the Finance and Markets Working Group. And then in addition to that, I work alongside the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions for COP26 and COP27, who are Dr. Mahmoud Muhildin and Mr. Nigel Topping, as the Finance Youth Fellow, which is an opportunity to incorporate youth perspectives into the work of the climate champions. And I think just from what I've heard today, they kind of fall into three pillars. The first pillar is definitely ambition. And since, you know, we're here with the Adaptation Fund, all of my pillars are going to be A words. So ambition, action, and then accountability. So starting with ambition, I really heard the ambition that's needed, particularly to convert assets to flows and adaptation for the most vulnerable among us. Inga, of course, highlighted the critical, you know, finding that the climate crisis is a child's rights crisis, and so we need to ensure that we convert assets to flows for young people and children, not just as beneficiaries, but as collaborators. And so that's what we hope to do, to empower young people across the, children and young people across the world as the youth constituency of the UNFCCC. Then second, I heard a lot about this dual problem where you have project proponents basically saying that they lack access to finance, but then from the financier's perspective, they say, you know, in terms of adaptation, they lack a viable, convincing pipeline of projects, particularly in adaptation and resilience, and particularly in emerging markets and developing economies. And so I commend both the Adaptation Fund and UNDP for trying to work so hard to resolve that dual conundrum. And then in terms of, you know, actions, I think it's really important to involve people beyond national governments because they definitely can't do it alone. You know, they're facing multiple crises that have come to the forefront in the past few years, and so we need to ensure we have the civil society involved, have the private sector meaningfully engaged, and I think the private sector shouldn't just be seen as a pool of capital, but a pool of expertise and innovation, which we heard about today. And so I would implore the private sector to come to the table to support young people and children in terms of capacity building and retention, building expertise, so that we are able to really bring projects that are convincing, that are communicated in a manner that they understand to the table. So, and it's particularly essential in emerging markets and developing economies. But it needs to be done in a manner that doesn't further the indebtedness of our countries, which are already facing heavy debt burdens. So that is something we hope for. We hope for innovative blended finance instruments from the private sector, as well as de-risking mechanisms, because I think that's one of the greatest challenges that they talk about when they're dealing with young people and children from emerging markets and developing economies. So they need to ensure that they use their innovation, their technical expertise to develop these innovative instruments so that we're able to access private sector funds. And then the last thing is just on accountability. So we need to see near-term science-based net zero targets. We need to see mainstreaming of adaptation and resilience into the finance sector. And then I think young people are always seen as a mechanism to hold the adults accountable, but I think the adults in the room really need to ensure that they're holding each other accountable. So, especially in the case of adaptation financing, we need mandatory reporting requirements as well as clear voluntary guidance for the private sector institutions as well as their adaptation investments. So I'll just close by saying that, we need to ensure that finance is accessible for children and youth, and finance is scaled up in adaptation, and particularly for the most vulnerable who were highlighted, because the longer we wait to act, the higher the cost of adaptation, and ultimately that leads to higher costs of losses and damages for communities like my own. So I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Once again, the issue of accountability, holding ourselves accountable, but also of innovation, once again, the innovative solutions that are proposed by youth, the out-of-the-box ideas, and often questioning the status quo and proposing more sustainable solutions. We are now moving on to our next panelist, Ms. Grecia Barcenia Calderon, who's the youth representative of the Scout Movement of Mexico. Grecia, the floor is yours.
Hola, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon. I hope you're not sleeping. I can see some sleepy faces already. Okay, so my name is Grecia, and first of all, I would like to thank for the opportunity, but also to recognize the great job you guys have been doing. I think the stories that have been shared already are amazing, and it's really interesting to know that there is really support behind youth, so I'm glad. So today I'm going to share with you how through the experience with Scouting, we can implement different projects on environmental and sustainable topics. So the Scout movement is the largest educational movement in the world. We are over 54 million young people around the world in more than 190 countries. And what we do in the Scout movement is that we equip young people with skills so that they can face and create create solutions for the rapid and changing world we are living right now. And we also enforce the value system that we all learn in home, but that we also learn at school. And through different kinds of experiences and a learning by doing methodology is kind of the way we reinforce these kind of things. So one of the main things we learn in Scouting is to take decisions, which is a very important thing here at COP. So we really learn how to be decision makers since we are 6 years old till we are 25 years old, and we learn how to take decisions because in life it's a little bit hard, so I cannot imagine how hard it is to take decisions here at COP. And this is only possible through a participation process where we are able to come together with innovative solutions, as you were saying, solutions that are out of the box and that are enriching everybody's opinion. And this also generates a sense of belonging that we feel part of being part of the movement, but also when we do a project. And this also leads the fact that we are able to take decisions, that we are engaged in a participation process. It also leads to have responsibility with the actions we are taking, but also with our friends and the community we are engaging when we do these kind of projects. And out of responsibility, it comes leadership. So in order to develop any kind of project, every young person needs to have a strong leadership, which can lead in really interesting projects that I'm going to take you through many of the steps that we have and we learn through Scouting. The first one is to, before do a project, we need to get informed. I'm really deeply informed, but only also get informed at local level, because it's not enough if I get informed in internet and then I just go to the community to try to do a project for them. Is that I really need to grasp the information from the local people and try to design together a solution. It's not that I'm gonna arrive there to tell them how to solve the problems, but we need to learn how to collaborate and really put together both perspectives so that the project can really last and be sustainable. The second one is we learn how to identify the skills that are needed to apply or implement that project. And if we don't have them, we go back to our scout group and we try to develop so that when we work on the ground, the skills are transferred to the community people, and also we are open to learn from them, right? Because it is important. And after that, we co-design the solution in collaboration, and then we take actions. So these 4 steps that I just described to you are part of actually some of the programs that we have, and our most recent initiative on climate change education, it's called the Earth Tribe, which focus exactly on that, like giving basic steps that every young people can follow so they can develop the skills and work in different topics such as biodiversity, climate change action, plastic reduction, or renewable energies. And yeah, so I think I'll just wrap up sharing with you 3 very nice stories on how this can look on the ground. And the first one is 3 years ago in Mexico, we had a really strong climate disaster close to Mexico City. And through these steps and these projects, Scouts Mexico were able to help rebuild different schools after they were demolished because of an earthquake. So many scouts helped there. Also, for example, in Kenya, there are scouts building nurseries so that they can reproduce different endemic species, so that they can show the local farmers how these species are good for keeping the nutrients on the ground, on the soil, and that also are good to repel the plagues. So this is one example. And the last one is based in Bangladesh, which many scouts have been helping in a forgotten island, because it's really, I say forgotten because it is really far, and they've been helping to build basic services such as education, helping building the water pipes, the farming, and this is all happening due to these steps of the projects. So if I can say, if we are able to equip young people with the basic skills, young people and children, because you were also mentioning, yeah. So with the basic skills in order to develop projects, I think we can really make changes. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grecia, and it's great to hear about some of the amazing work that the Scouts movement does in the field. We are moving on now to our last panelist, Mr. Mavuse Hortonji from Benin. He is part of one of the Adaptation Fund NGO network, which is a 227-member network, was a role in capturing lessons of effective AF projects, as well as raising awareness and providing localized input. Mavuse, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's very difficult to talk or to speak at the last one after all those things I hear. Something very interesting. So we speak about many things, and I think congratulations to the Adaptation Fund. First, to make a study to know how youth are involved in their projects. Is a good practice. If all those funds can do it, how youth and kids are involved of projects, so we will go very far. I would like to make a comment first. In my country, Benin, or Togo, or other West African countries, when we talk about youth in adaptation, people are not seeing well where youth or kids are. And I give an example. When we have flooding in the countries, the first person involved or impacted is youth or kid. Why? Schools are closed, and people have to leave their homes, leave their day-to-day activities, and we take our kids, take our youth, and get in the way. We have malaria, we have cholera inside those flooding problems or impacts. So that is why it's very important that inside adaptation project, it's very important to see the place of youth and kid. The second comment I would like to point out here is very important to ask about project focus on youth. Several years ago, it was very interesting to ask project focus on show how that project impact women. I think it's time to ask project to show how they are impacting youth and kids in our countries. That will help a lot to involve youth in this process. So what are our activities with youth inside my organization, Young Volunteer for Environment, or my networks, Adaptation Fund, CSO networks? We have 2 or 3 very important points. The first point is to use youth for collecting data. During our monitoring activities, to monitor projects, to see how all those projects is going far in the communities, we use most of the time youth to go to the communities and collecting data on how the project is going on. I think it's something very interesting, and we have a wonderful feedback. The second point is our action before the projects. Most of the projects are designing, and is very relevant, or is an important point in the Adaptation Fund evidence to show how population are consultation, the consultation step before designing the project. So during our comment, we ensure that there is youth also in this part consulted, to be sure that they are agree with all those adaptation measures people are retained for the project. The third one activities we have is, first of all, to build youth capacity inside this process. Youth have energy, youth have capacity, but if they don't understand how it's very important to follow adaptation fund or adaptation project in their area, they will be there, and we don't know that we have to have a watchdog eyes in those projects. So that is why we build their capacity inside all the countries we are working. So it is interesting to make just some few recommendations. The first one is really appreciate if this study is known by our countries. Because most of the time when we make comment on project, when we ask, what is the youth place in the project? They will tell you that, yes, youth, they signed the presence letter. The presence, yeah, we are present, but are you really involved? When the fund come, what is the place? How many activities will be led really with the youth? So this study, it will be very interesting to, yes, is public, is on the website, but it's very interesting to have inside the capacity building with the designing authority to see how they can go through this study, and knowing that is interesting, not just how we call it in French, faire valoir, just youth there, but they are not really involved. The second recommendation is ask for projects focused on youth. That can be a good way to help to have new kind of project focused on youth and the resilience of youth. And the last point is, how can we help that the youth-led organization, access to those funds? It's not easy for our countries to access to the fund. And now talking about youth and talking about kids. So it's a good reflection to see how we can have new process to help those youth-led organizations access to the fund. All those minor thinking can help us to go next 2 years, 3 years to something very wonderful, that the Adaptation Fund is the first fund where youth can directly access to all those funds. So thank you to invite me to this panel.
Thank you very much, Mawuze. So throughout these presentations, we heard a lot about the roles that the youth and children take and should take in adaptation projects. We've also heard some recommendations from various organizations. This concludes our presentations, and we would like to open the floor for discussions, questions, suggestions that you may have for our panelists, the Secretariat. The floor is yours. We have 4 minutes for questions and answers before we have to exit the room. No questions? Any proposals? The gentleman up front. Can you please state your name and perhaps who the question is directed to? Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Nelio Zunguza from Mozambique. I'm this event to represent Youth Climate Action Coalition from Mozambique. There's some initiative to create a platform there, supporting with Save the Children, UNICEF, and the other organization there in Mozambique. So I don't have a question specifically, but I need to reinforce the message about the capacity building. I saw every day, every time in internet, call application about funds, something like that. But the big challenge we have is to know what the donor wants, because we have toothpaste, but we don't have bridge to connect it. We have a problem like we discover in the community. We have someone have money to help or have something to help, but we don't have bridge here to connect us, to transform the problem we see in the community for make understand that someone have money to help us. We know that, for example, the fund institution receive annually any projects, but how you can choose this project is different for this. It's quality, but quality for who? For the donators. So I suggest that the institution give a money, give a material to help, sometimes give some course or something else to show how to draw a project for Adaptation Fund. What Adaptation Fund considers important in the project. I don't lost my time, I don't lost my temper to write something without the Adaptation Fund parameters, because I know Adaptation Fund will support the project into his parameter. And it's normal, we know that. So we say, please, help us to make this capacity building to get this. Because if we don't do that, we will continue to say, we want to help a youth, and youth say the fund don't want to help us. In each corp we come in, we give money. The youth say, we don't have capacity to have this money. It's only that. Many thanks.
Thank you. It's a recommendation well taken. There's a gentleman there in the back. I think we have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Not working? Okay. Thank you for this very wonderful presentation. After Mr. Mawuze intervention, I want to say something. We are young people among African countries who need Adaptation Fund help. I don't know, for the next process, for the next stage after this COP27, why not try to, I don't know how to say it, why not try to create a council or a hub focused on youth to take their opinion in account the adaptation fund process. It may be a good way to make young people, especially from Francophone or French countries, because we are maybe not taking in account in any process, because we are coming there, we are talking English, but French is my first language. So for me, the language barrier is important. Try to find a way to resolve it. And the second part of my intervention is about how the Adaptation Fund is supporting those million initiatives like ours, because I'm part of an initiative called Climate Caravan. I don't know if you heard about it. We make caravan in more than 28 countries, looking for key message we want to address in this COP: loss and damage, financing, and renewable energy, all that. I don't know how the Adaptation Fund can support those initiatives led by young people across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. We are fully aware that the language issue is a problem, and the Adaptation Fund does its utmost possible to produce knowledge in other languages as well. We know, for instance, this youth study was produced in English as well, but oftentimes we translate summaries of our knowledge products in French and Spanish so far. On the second one, on how to support initiatives, we do welcome you warmly to our pavilion, and we can speak about some of, perhaps on the innovation side, how we support youth groups. We are located in the Blue Zone in Block C, Pavilion 46, so do stop by and we can have, exactly, right next door, a further discussion. I think we have to conclude the session. It's 4:30. Perhaps I can have a bilateral with you now when I walk out, but they're making signs at me that we need to exit the room. Thank you all very much. Thank you for participating in our event, and I wish you all a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you, bye.